In this tutorial, I want to show you how you can place a mock-up in a variety of different sized screens. These screens have a unique challenge, however. For the lighting of them, you can see how there's a strong directional light that comes from the left and cast over those areas. So it's going to be more difficult than simply placing our product inside of the screen. We want to be able to mimic the lighting effect that's also here as well. So to get started, I'm going to open the Desk Screens JPEG into Photoshop. We're going to keep the background layer exactly as it is. Now also in this, I've given you the exact dimensions of each of the screens, and that's going to be very important because we want to be able to create a smart object layer that's the same proportions as these screens as well. So to do this, for each of the smart objects, we're going to use our rectangle tool. Do make sure that you're working in shape mode. You can set the fill color to be whatever you want it to be, and make sure there's no stroke going around your object. Now to type in a specific height and width, all we're going to do is click once with this object, and we're going to type in the dimensions that are here. Do note that they're in pixels, so 2,500 pixels wide by 1,600 pixels tall. We'll say OK, and this will give us a large rectangle. Now it's going to be larger than our actual screen is, but that's okay. As long as it's proportional, you can still scale this down to make it something nice and much more manageable. Now before we do anything else, we need to convert this rectangle to a smart object. So go into our layer, we're going to go up to our options and choose Convert to Smart Object. And now we can rename this. This will be our computer screen. With this done, let's go and warp this to fit inside of the area. We can, with the layer selected, go up to Edit, down to Transform, and even though I said the word warp, I want you to use the Distort Transformation. With Distort, this will give you the ability to click on the corners and get those corners to match up as close as you can to the screen that's on your screen. It may require you to zoom in, and sometimes it's actually good to drop the opacity of this layer if you want to be able to see it better. So there we go. Now I can drop it down and I can see roughly where those are, even if they're running off the edge of my screen. With that done, I can hit return and lock in that transformation. And I'm going to bring my opacity back up to 100%. Now let's test out our computer screen to see how the mock-up will look. I'm going to double click on my smart object to take me into my smart object editor. We can go to File and let's place that mock-up image that I gave you. In my case, it's on the computer screens, and here's the scripture type background. We'll say Place, and then I'm going to scale it up to fill the entire area. Since this is just for testing purposes, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but it'll be okay for what we're doing. Now as I hit Save, I can return back to my design, and you can see how this will look inside my window. It fits nicely and it's rotated and it's distorted correctly, but we need to add back in the shine on top of the screen. In order to do this, we're going to create a new layer on top of our computer screen area. This layer will allow us to add a gradation of color on top of it that we can later blend in with the design. To make the gradient, choose your gradient tool. It's usually hiding underneath your paint bucket tool if you can't find it. And we're going to set our fill or our gradient type under Basic to be the foreground to transparent option. This is going to let you set your foreground color and go completely transparent at the end of your gradient. Now right now my foreground color is set to be orange, so let's change our foreground color to be white. Double click on it, set it to white. Now when I create a gradient, it'll go from white to transparent. The final thing I want to do is to make sure I'm working in a linear gradient, and my color mode is set to normal with 100% opacity. With that new layer 1 selected, I can click and drag over the area to create a simple gradient. Now right now it's only showing up over the entire area. We want to be able to clip it inside of our screen. So with layer 1 still selected, let's go up to Layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask. This will create that gradient only inside of the screen that we have. And from here, we can start playing around with our blending modes and even drop in the opacity. If you think that it's too stark, we're going to drop the opacity just a bit more to bring it down to something more manageable. And if you play around with your blending modes, you can have it blend in much better too. Things like overlay, screen, hard light, or vivid light. Looks like soft light's giving me some good results that still show the colors. Again, playing around with both your opacity and the blending mode works together. Now I've got my image with a nice sheen going across the screen. Once I've done with the computer image, let's choose both the layer 1. I'm going to rename this layer my shine layer. We can select both the shine and the computer screen, and let's group them together into a folder, and we'll call that group computer screen. With that done, let's repeat the process now for the phone and for the tablet. Again, we need to create a new rectangle first. We'll click once and type in the dimensions of our phone in this case, so it'll be 640 by 1136. You can bring it up so you can see it, and before you do anything else, let's convert it to a smart object. Now that it's a smart object, you can rename it phone screen, and we can test our image by double-clicking on the smart object layer, going up to File, and placing the image that I gave to you. Scale it up so that it fills the entire area. In this case, we'll move it over. We can save it, jump back into our area, and now we can distort it to make it look like it's fitting inside of our screen by going up to Edit, there we go, Transform, and Distort. Distort it till it's placed nicely inside of each of the corners of your screen. If you need to, zoom in. Once it's placed nicely inside of here, commit to that change by hitting the checkbox. Now let's add a shine on top of this layer. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to use my gradient tool. Make sure it's going from white to transparent, linear gradient. I'm simply going to click and drag over the area. To make it show up only inside of the screen, with layer 1 selected, you can go to Layer and create a clipping mask. And then from here, play around with the opacity and the blending mode. Looks like soft light was what I got to give me good results. Now that I've got a shine, I'm going to rename this my shine layer. Select both of the layers and group them together into a folder. And we'll call this our phone screen. Finally, let's do the same thing for the tablet. Choose your rectangle and click once. Type in the dimensions, 1536 by 2048. If you need to, you can move it around and scale it down so that it makes it much more manageable. Before you do anything else, let's convert our rectangle to a smart object. Now I can rename it Tablet Screen. If you want now, you can transform it to fit the area by going up to Edit and Transform and Distort. Let it match up each of the corners. To test out an image, double-click on the smart object and place your image into the area. When we save it and close it out, to go back to here, you can see how it looks. Next, make a new layer on top of your tablet and use your gradient tool to add a linear gradient shine over the area. Once it's been added, with that layer selected, create a clipping mask and then play around with the opacity and your blending modes to give it a more realistic look. Now that we've got this set up, you can save this as a Photoshop file. Do make sure that it's set to format as Photoshop and you got your layers, and that Photoshop file is what you'll upload to the class page.